Today we're going to interview Kev Gay. Now, Kev, I've worked with for a number of years, and he's a good mate of mine, but he's got a really, really interesting life, worked within the police service, and now he runs a charity. Good morning, Kev.
Good morning, Paul. Lovely to see you again.
Good to see you, mate. The weather could have been a bit kinder for us, but hopefully we'll be warm enough in here today. So, Kev, we've both been in the police. We both served Essex Police for some time. What year did you join?
I joined in 1988.
88. Yeah, I went in December 86. I went in a strange time. Harlow boy, born and bred, or?
No, I was actually born in Stoke Newington in London.
Oh.
We moved out of there when I was 5, moved over to Harlow. And then from then on, yeah, Harlow.
So that explains the Arsenal.
Yes, connection.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you moved to Harlow, you do all your education in Harlow. How old were you when you joined the police?
I was 20.
Yeah. A kid?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's surprising really when you look back. Yes, you were a kid.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I was 21, and I remember going to a domestic, and the old boy there's probably dead now, and I'm telling him how to lead his life, but I didn't know what a relationship was. A relationship was somebody that I'd been out with for more than 3 weeks. That was,
yeah.
And this is a bloke where I'm telling all sorts of things, but I didn't know whether his mortgage. I didn't understand at that time. So, but it's a great time of life to join.
Oh, absolutely. And from my point of view, people turn around and say, "Would you do it all again if you had the opportunity?" And no qualms. Yes, I would.
Yeah,
I would
so
do
would I.
exactly.
Yeah, so would I. And there are some things I change, but some people I change. But in the main, yeah, of course, I would do it again. So, you joined the police. Where did you go to when you first joined?
So, bearing in mind I'd lived in Harlow, they moved me to Southend, which, to be fair, I loved. You know, for a young lad, I was at that time in a relationship with my girlfriend, who is now my wife.
Right.
So it's quite a serious relationship. But yeah, moved me to Southend in lodgings. But what a life, you know, a 20-year-old, send you to Southend.
And I think anyone who's listening to this now who hasn't had the benefit of working within the police, living in lodgings, being part of a big shift and a big team, it was great, wasn't it? Because when you walked in there, certainly at Southend at the time, they're big shifts. You'd be given the teapot. You were the probationer, and the last probationer would be absolutely delighted to see you because they can stop making the tea for everybody.
Yes. And that changed. So going through my career, it changed, and what a shame.
Oh.
Because actually they were amazing times. The camaraderie was second to none. Tea and toast in the morning, every morning.
Yep.
Was tradition. And as you say, the probationers made the tea, they did the toast. What a waste and what a shame that it's gone.
And that was part of your acceptance into the team, wasn't it? You, if you took part in that, then they knew that you had their back. You were there to support them. We'd all moan about it, but actually that was part of it. And you couldn't wait for the next probationer to come and join the shift. That
was your bonding.
Yeah, it was.
And you needed that. You know.
You're at Southend for how long?
So I was at Southend only for a couple of years. So I think 3 years I did my probation there. And I think this goes back to the Harlow. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was still in Harlow. So it was a bit of an escape to try and get out of the south of the county, which wasn't easy at that point.
No.
So Stansted Airport came up.
Stansted
Airport. When it was in the old side of Stansted Airport while they were still building the new terminal. But that came up. There was firearms involved, which hence, I carried through my career. But yeah, that was my next stage. So I moved from Southend over to Stansted Airport, and it couldn't have been more different.
No EasyJet, no Ryanair at Stansted at that time.
No.
And what year was this?
That would have been 1991.
91. So the new terminal, as we call it, is just being built.
Yep. It's a building site, most of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
The old terminal, when I was a kid, I mean, I flew from there when I was really small. My dad was stationed out in Germany. that was almost not a porter cabin, but a tiny, tiny building, which had increased over the years,
Yeah.
but it's still small. How did you feel at that time? You're now 23.
Mm-hmm.
They're giving you a gun, Kevin.
Yep.
How did that make you feel? You've had to go through the assessments, I assume. What was that like?
I mean, from the point of, I didn't go to Stansted Airport to be a firearms officer.
Right.
I went to Stansted Airport for the ability to move from the south of the county to the north of the county. The firearms part was an added bonus, and it was an added bonus. I'd been interested in the military when I was younger and wanted to go into actually the Royal Marines. So that was a real passion of mine. So actually to have a firearms course, albeit still young, that was exciting. It was exciting. It was something I wanted to do, and lots of responsibility. It's not something to be toyed with, but yeah, that's sort of started me on my firearms career.
And what weapons did you train on at that time?
At the time, they had the Berettas, so the 92F Berettas, and I believe the MP5s. So they had the MP5s then.
Just coming in, I would imagine.
Yes, yeah.
I never carried a gun.
Okay.
I couldn't be trusted with a pen sometimes. So to be given a gun would be that could be quite dangerous. Although I've got guns, but that's shotguns. Let me just get that out there. But yeah, I've never sort of been into firearms as such. You're at Stansted Airport. Were there any major incidents? Because we went through a spate of having hijacks. Did any of that happen whilst you were there?
So when we moved over to the main terminal, which happened about a year afterwards, so it was only a quick transition. I think my time in firearms, there were only 2 hijackings.
When you say only 2, Kevin,
when I say only, the thing was Stansted Airport is the hijack airport for the UK. So that's the one that's got the licence. If any hijacked airplane comes in to UK airspace, that's where it basically goes. They've got the space, and they've got the training, and they've got the facilities. So when I say only, it's a strange thing to say. But I was involved in one of them, sort of briefly, just on sort of the periphery. But the second one, where I found out my team actually made the approach to the aircraft, went onto the aircraft. I was watching that from a fisherman's hut in Yorkshire. I was out on holiday, made the assumption that actually I knew it was going on. My shift were on that day. I knew my shift were on that day. And that was a disappointment, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I bet.
That was a disappointment.
The thing is, there's a lot of preparation that goes into fantastic preparation with, and it's no secret, but special forces and everybody else. And it's a well-trodden path when it comes to the training element. But to put it into practice, thank goodness we don't have to put it into practice very often. But there are so many people within that jigsaw puzzle that get involved. It's brilliant. I mean, I've done the training stuff. I was on the back of one just doing some statement reading, but it's a well-oiled machine when it comes down to it.
Yeah, from the start to finish, from planning, preparation, the operation itself, and then obviously afterwards the debriefs and all the other sort of infrastructure that's in place. It is a well-oiled machine, needs to be, with some really professional people involved.
Yeah. I remember when the Sudanese one came in, I think it was Sudanese, they couldn't let the aircraft leave the UK because it wasn't airworthy. I mean, they put people's lives at significant risk just by flying on that aircraft without being hijacked. 3 years, did you say, at Stansted Airport?
Yes. And then there's natural progressions. If you're going to stay in the firearms world, there's natural progressions. The Force Support Unit, which is where I went to, in my opinion, was the pinnacle of, that's what you went for. And that's what I strive towards. So, that was my goal. And I realised my goal as well. So went off to the Force Support Unit, which was brilliant. It was either that or the armed response vehicles. So you went out onto the armed response vehicles. But at the time, there were only 2 garages. One was south, one was north, and it was nowhere near where I lived.
No.
So it sort of didn't make sense.
The FSU was the natural progression.
Yeah.
So for anybody listening, the Force Support Unit, it's a battalion, I suppose, a small army of men and women who are trained in a number of different areas: firearms, public order, surveillance, method of entry, but it's all high level. It's not. They will do the local stuff, but it's all very strategic. The kinds of things that they get involved in is very strategic. And dare I say it, from a jealousy perspective, there are, the camaraderie is second to none in the force. It certainly was.
Absolutely. That's, I mean, the camaraderie within the police, I suppose in our times was probably second to none. And that was the next level. It really was. I mean, you really had each other's back. You supported each other through, thick and thin. And that was really important, really important.
And I think that, I mean, the thick stuff, there's some really good things, great deployments, and you'll always remember the great deployments, but the sadness, and I remember people passing away who are members of the support unit whilst you were there,
Yep.
And there is still a memorial wall, there was when we retired, of the pictures of these great people who, they had your back 24/7.
Yep.
How does that impact when I've lost colleagues, and I can explain it, but when you lose colleagues that you work so closely with and you trust, what's the impact on the overall team?
I think that's the bonus of having the overall team. Very good friend of mine died, and he was very young, and we came together as a shift. I think that was our saving grace. We came together as a shift. We actually arranged to go to the police headquarters bar all together, all to have a drink. We wasn't getting madly drunk. It was just that we were together, and that was important. I think that makes it easier in a way.
Yeah.
That you do have each other's back. That is that bonding. It draws you closer together as well.
Yeah, and I recall the divers.
Yes.
The day they died, they were support unit members of support unit. They came out up under a vessel in Dobbs Weir, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And they passed away at the scene. And I remember how grief-stricken the entire force were, but the support unit in particular. But the bonding as a team was just unbelievable. I hope that it doesn't happen and people don't die in service, etc. But they will. But I hope that they still have that bond, and I hope that they still have that camaraderie within the police and within the support unit in particular. What was the highlight of being on the support unit? What would you say was the best part, apart from the big guns and the flashy cars?
Well, from that point of view, it was so diverse. It was so diverse on the support unit. We did all the big public order deployments. We did all the firearms deployments, surveillance, as you say, method of entry. I was involved in. I was a rifle officer as well, so there was another level of like the firearms activities that we got involved in. I can't think. We did all the major sort of murders and major crimes. We always got involved in those because, again, we could deploy a big team of people that just all work together. I haven't got, that I can think of at this moment in time, a single point. There were just many, many fascinating times that I was proud to be part of.
Yeah. And it is a club. The support unit is a club, and we've got some really good friends who have been sergeants, constables, sergeants, gone all the way through to chief superintendents on there, and they're still part of that club. They're still part of the FSU team.
Yep. There's still There's still a Facebook page for that.
Is there?
Yep. So there's, the old guys and girls still post things, still asking questions. And the club is still running.
Yeah.
It's still there.
That's brilliant. My uncle was on there in the mid-'70s when it basically first started. He went on there mid-'70s, and he was involved. There was a chase, I think a chap called Paul Howe, was chased up to Ramsey, and there was a discharge of a firearm, and he was shot. He pointed the gun at Frank Ruggles, who's now passed away. It's a great, as you said, the police service in itself is a great club, and I hope that they're enjoying it as much as we did. How long did you serve on the support unit?
So I was there 10 years. So I was on there for 10 years. With the caveat, I sort of moved over to weapons training, which was not a side. It was a sideways move as such, because they were part of the firearms team still. So I sort of moved over there after 10 years. I think I did about 6 months to a year where I was going over there on regular occasions just as a transition.
Yeah.
Before I moved over there permanently. So, yeah, 10 years on the FSU, and then sort of moved across to weapons training, which...
When you did your rifle course, where did you have to go for that? Where would you do your rifle course?
So a lot of the training was down in Lydd and Hythe, I think down in Kent.
Oh, where we used to do public order training.
Yep, down at the military ranges that are down on the coast. Yorkshire, we used to use quite a lot for the courses, because then you had a very different sort of geography, weather conditions, and that was all really key to training you how to work with weather, work with winds, different sort of geography areas and things like that. So that was good. Up at Wakefield, a lot of the time we used to go up to. Used to stay at Wakefield Police Headquarters. Yeah, many memorable occasions up there.
Did you get deployed very often as a rifleman? Would you have to go, or was that something that was a bolt-on to a deployment?
It was a bolt-on. So within the team, you tended to have other specialisms that people took. So you'd only probably have 2 or 3 rifle officers on each shift. So firearms, if there was a firearms deployment and there was some distance involved, they would bring the rifle officers in for that. They were very good at that sort of the surveillance side of things as well, just watching, reporting on things that are going on, because they had the optics, the higher level optics. So they used them for that as well.
Were you a crop as well? Did you?
I did do the crops. So
that's a covert policing tactic where Kevin and his colleagues would dig himself into a hedge somewhere and defecate or urinate into a bag and store it for about 3 days before they could come out. That's another fascinating part. And I've seen the footage where you've got criminals literally walking within feet of you. That's another fascinating part of what the police service do. People think that the police are one-dimensional. It's all about arrest. It's all about... But actually, there's so many parts to this machine. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah,
and a lot of that is evidence gathering. That's the side that you never see. They supply the evidence for the major teams, the major crime teams that you worked on. Sort of gave them that additional evidence in relation to some of those more covert things that were going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we go back, there was a crop officer who was murdered by Kenneth Noy. It just shows how dangerous it is to undertake that as a practice, as a part of your business. It's very, very dangerous and quite thrilling. It must be when you see the suspect and they're walking towards you. You just think, I hope they don't see me or hear me, because it's all over quite quickly.
Yes, and I suppose if you ever asked when was the most frightening time, that was it was one of those times when we were in a covert hide, and we had exactly that. Can they see us? You always think the worst, that they can. What are your options going to be? And that's always part of your planning and preparation anyway. You always have those options. But it doesn't make it any easier.
No.
That's quite scary. But in another way, it's scary, but adrenaline.
Oh,
the adrenaline is massive around that.
Absolutely. At the end of your time on the support unit, 10 years, so you've now got 13 years in the police. Mm-hmm. What did you do next?
So I moved over to weapons training.
Right.
So became a weapons trainer. So you have to do a trainer's course. And again, teaching all the aspects. So because I was a rifle officer, I used to teach rifle. as well. Took the courses. Then Taser came in as well.
Of course, yeah.
So we had a lot of that training going on. So all the basic courses, we used to have monthly training courses on the ranges, or they were doing tactics training. So all of that had to be planned, and that was that was hard work, unusual hard work, because you are planning for the training. You put everything into that, from when they get their food, when they get there, how they're going to get there. That's tough. That's quite tough.
But there's another side to it, Kev, and you're training people to use lethal force should the need arise. Mm-hmm. And if somebody gets shot, if a member of the public gets shot, a criminal gets shot, one of the first things they look at is the training that they've undertaken.
Yeah.
How did that make it? So let's take you back to the support unit, and you're deployed with a firearm. How did you feel when you're deployed? You think, if I've got to shoot that suspect, how did you feel about the support or potential support? What was in place for you at that time?
I suppose that's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. Yes, we often thought about it. We hadn't had a police shooting in this county for many, many years prior to me joining the force support unit. So they were very rare. But we saw the Metropolitan Police Service getting involved in those, saw the shootings, saw the aftermath. And it was a worry, but it was one of those things that you took the responsibility for and just got on with it. Yes, I felt relatively supported, but there was also elements of investigations that we saw that were very unfair.
Oh, absolutely.
That officers were treated potentially like criminals until such time that they were proved innocent. And that tended to be, the way that certainly we perceived it.
Yeah.
So it was difficult in that respect, but actually I would never have given it up.
It's interesting because I'm going to interview somebody who actually shot someone in the line of duty and then stood trial for the murder. Can you imagine the emotions? You can't, can you?
No.
You think you're doing everything at that time for Queen and Country to support the safety of the public, and next thing you know, you're gripping the rail at the Old Bailey. He was acquitted, and rightfully so. But the support, there are two factions within the police service. You've got the supporting side, and then you've got the condemning side. Certainly now. And I think that the last time that a shot was fired was probably when Bill Bishop was sadly killed.
Yes.
1984. You finished your weapons training.
Yep.
What happens next?
Well, that was a good question. What did happen next? Where was I willing to go? I'd spent best part of 13 years plus as a firearms officer, doing all the major things. So the force support unit were involved in pretty much anything and everything that the force were involved in. So it was, what do I do next? So I decided to go down the promotion route. I didn't want to go back to, and there's no disrespect, but I just didn't want to go back to being a beat bobby, go back to division, because I felt that I just had too much to give. There's too much that you lose, experience and knowledge-wise. So I decided to go down the promotion route.
And what year was that?
Wow, so that would have been 1990. In 2008. 2008, I was promoted to sergeant. And interestingly, what the police often do, albeit you've got that knowledge and that experience, what they'll often do is send you back to division.
Yeah.
You go back to your roots. And actually, one of the best things I ever did.
Yeah.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. As a sergeant, I don't think I'd have coped as a constable again, with all the pressures that were there. But as a sergeant, you had an element of control.
Yeah.
But I went into neighbourhood policing. As a sergeant, I sort of, again, spanned lots of areas. Got involved in some of the proactive teams, some of the development teams. I was on the police development unit, which developed probationers coming through, and that just came from my experience, my knowledge, and actually I wanted to help others understand the greater things within the police force.
Where was that?
So I went back to all over the west of Essex, basically.
Okay.
So I initially went back to Loughton. I worked at Waltham Abbey, Epping, Ongar for a short time, Harlow, Brentwood. So yeah, I think I sort of spanned all the different areas in the west of Essex.
And all but one of those have now gone in their true
Yes.
form. It's only Harlow out of that list that actually survived as a police station, and that's 9 till 5 now.
Yep.
It's a great shame. I think about when Essex took over from the Met, Loughton, Waltham Abbey, they had 60 officers that covered that area, a full custody suite.
Yep.
I think they even kept the horses at Waltham Abbey for a period of time. I got promoted to Harlow in 2007, and I was in a similar situation. I was on major crime. I'd been there for 7 years, and the reason I took promotion is because somebody else was telling me what to do who hadn't got promotion, and I didn't want to do disclosure anymore.
Yep.
I wanted to give them the opportunity to do the disclosure rather than and that's why I took it. And a mutual friend of ours who ended up as a chief superintendent on the support unit, or MSD, I phoned him up and said, I'd like to go and be a detective sergeant. And he said, no chance, you're going back. If you come and work for me, boy, you're going to be a sergeant on uniform. So I thought, well, I'm not doing that. So I spoke to Ivor Harvey, and a job came up at Harlow. I went there as a DS, and that's how I started there. But you've done your time there, and I know that we worked together on a couple of jobs. But you have always been into your public order, and that side of policing. I enjoyed it immensely, working with the likes of yourself. But you got to do some really interesting things. I mean, you went to the G8 or
The two G8s I did. One in Scotland at Gleneagles. That was when I was a firearms. I was a weapons trainer at the time.
Okay.
So I went up there as a firearms officer.
flown up there.
No.
Oh, loads of people got
No.
flown, didn't they? There was
Yeah, no. We were bussed up there on the old support unit vehicles.
with a mobile gun safe, I assume.
Yes. Yeah, we used to. A lot of that was put into like a blue van, a plain blue van.
Really?
Put all the guns in there and off we went.
So you
Yep.
bust up there. What was that like, doing a mutual aid in Scotland? Because they've got different rules to us as well.
They had. They had to give us some sort of local training around some of the laws, obviously, that you've got to abide by and what you can do. There's certain things you can do up there, certain things you can't. So, yes, they had to do some local training. So that was part of the deployment as well. Luckily, I was on the firearms side, so we were actually resourcing the armoury.
Oh, okay.
So I actually had quite a cushy
Kev,
deployment
you're supposed to
up
be
there.
telling everybody listening how tough it
know.
was that you were sleeping in a bivvy somewhere and had to catch your own food.
We were down on nights, so we did the 12-hour night shift running the armouries. But obviously the teams were coming in and out regularly, and so it was a cushy deployment in a way. Probably disappointing because you're seeing some of the things that were going on up there and not being involved.
Yeah.
So that wasn't easy from that point of view. It was an easy deployment, but I'd like to have been involved a little bit more.
Bit more operational
But,
stuff.
As you said earlier, it's the whole process. The whole process has to work. The whole machine has to be there, and you've got to be part of that machine in some way.
Yeah, and not one person can't do it on their own.
No,
Despite what some of the chief officers
of course.
think. You also went to Northern Ireland. Now, I think that's the only time that British police, English police, Scottish, Welsh police have been deployed into Northern Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? And sorry, I'll double question here. That was in response to the concerns around the Orange Day parades.
They were.
Is it 12th of July?
I don't know the exact, but yes, it's the annual Orange Day parades that they do over
And,
there.
and what was that like?
That was probably one of the most exciting deployments I've had. Very political. I was actually a sergeant at the time, but I was promoted to an inspector. I was an acting inspector over there, so I was actually a unit commander.
So you had 21 people working for you, three buses?
Well,
or-
they don't use buses over there, so we had to deploy as the PSNI deploy.
Right,
So
okay.
they deploy out in armoured Land Rovers.
Right.
So obviously you haven't got a van load of people, so you're all in the back of an armoured Land Rover. You have to have armed support as well within that as well, because obviously the risks that are out there. So a very, very different deployment. We had to do some training around that because they use water cannons. At the time they would use the rubber bullets. So
Yep.
you had to deploy with them. That was quite common. But they had live firearms on the line as well.
Wow.
So there were certain things within that training that actually, if something happened, that you were trained to do, and the armed officers then took over. So you sort of took cover because you're there for public order. You haven't got all the necessary equipment and things like that. So yeah, the part of that training was you need to take cover, and then the armed contingent comes in, and you're working hand in glove with them. Fascinating. That was very political, very, very strange place to work.
And it got lively, didn't it? I mean, you'd see it on the news, and the petrol bombs coming in, and I suppose you have to have a certain level of tolerance because it's already escalated, but you don't want it to go any further.
No, so as I say, very political deployment. We were held in reserve for for days, basically. But it got to a point where they had to deploy them. They didn't want to because it was that English police on.
Yeah.
Very. It was very difficult politically, but we did get deployed, and my unit actually got deployed to the front of one of the active days. We were live petrol bombed. We do it in training,
Yeah.
but we were live petrol bombed, rocks, bricks, everything was thrown at us. Water cannons were deployed over the top of us, so we were absolutely in the mix. And you don't think about it like this, but again, what an adrenaline rush. We come away from that as a team, and I was working with people that weren't from Essex, they were from all over. So very different sort of dynamics, but we came away from that, and again, the bond that you feel because you've been involved in something like that, you probably would never forget.
Oh, absolutely. Did you do Withen? Did you get deployed on Withen, the London riots?
Yes, I mean on occasions we did those
nighttime cover and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. I remember going there, and it was fine. We just got I had 3 buses, and I had great people working with me, Lee DeVal, and some really experienced people.
Yes.
And then we got deployed to Brixton because somebody, believe it or not, there's a gun shop in Brixton, and the mood went from friendly but firm policing to this is all going to go horribly wrong now.
Yes.
And it is. You feel the mood change when the blue light goes on and your driver goes a bit faster. You can feel everybody become a bit more somber. But like you say, it's fascinating, and your adrenaline it keeps you going. And
the training. I think at that point, you go into that trained mode, that experiential learning.
And the interesting thing is, Kev, the training element. There are different personalities on a bus, on a vehicle, and you're not going to get on well with everybody. You can't possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that you know exactly why you are there, and you work as a professional, responsible body of people.
Definitely.
And you watch each other's back. You have to, because you have to trust those people around you, because otherwise it could go horribly wrong. And it's one thing training at lid, but it's another thing when people are actually throwing proper bricks at you.
Yes.
And giving it large, or you've got a burnt out vehicle next to you which is still smouldering, and you think, bit more petrol on that,
Yep.
and we're all going up. It is an interesting dilemma. 2000 and what year did we get up to? Where were we? So you're doing all the stuff in the Epping Forest and the west of the LPA, or division as it was then. What then changes, Kev? What changes for Kev?
So I actually went on to, so the force sort of reinvented what was called the Operational Support Group. It was a bit like a public order force support unit.
Yeah.
So all they did, say all, they were a public order unit. They were fast road trained. So there was lots of things that they did out on the major
interceptors were
roads.
part of those at one point?
Yes, they were. So they became. So a lot of the interceptor officers came onto the operational support group. So they had that sort of training,
Yeah.
that experience, that knowledge, which was really good. You know, it was all shared knowledge. So I did that for a year. And again, a few interesting deployments because you were the public order officers for the
Spearhead.
force. Yeah. Yeah. So again, and going in there as a sergeant, it was a different dynamic that I had on the force support unit, because I was then in charge, supervising a large team, and had responsibility for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It was a strange departure when they went down the OSG route, but I can see why they did it, because it actually gave a mobile body of people to step up and
Yes.
do the middle ground stuff, if you like.
Yep.
Not still strategic, but not as strategic. So you're there for 1 year.
Yes, yeah, it was then I sort of, again, promotion was rearing, you know. So I'm thinking, so we were in that sort of cadre of officers that you did your 30 years,
Yeah.
and then you could retire on a full pension. I was then at 24, 25 years thinking, okay, what do I do now? And it was that I've done so many interesting things. It's now a case of working towards a better retirement.
Dash for cash.
And it was, you know, there was an element of that to it, and rightly so. Almost to ensure my family were safe and
Yeah, absolutely.
and looked after for many years. So I decided to go down that route, and with the experience and knowledge and sort of that I'd sort of developed over the years, felt that, you know, that was a good route to go.
And we did some great stuff together. I mean,
We did.
We had such a laugh, and we had a great command team as well. And we had license to, if we wanted to do a job, and we had the intelligence and the reason to do it, we'd do it.
Yep.
The undercover staff, you know, supporting the undercover teams. It was brilliant, and I couldn't have done those jobs without you. And I will say that, because we had such a laugh, and you guys did all the work. I just did all the talking and policy, and batting off the undercovers. But what was your best part of your police? I mean, the support unit, I suppose, has got to be high up there.
Yep.
But is there any other element you think? Oh, actually, that was, or is that it? Is that?
I suppose I think a really good steer, actually, that you've just gone on to. I became an inspector. I finished my career on traffic over at Chigwell, over on the motorway there. Interestingly, so traffic and force support units did not mix. So they were complete opposites.
Yeah.
You had a white cap on traffic. That was
And nobody liked you.
nobody liked them. So it was an interesting dynamic. But I've got to be, you know, in answer to your question, what a professional bunch of guys and girls who knew their job exceptionally well, were very good at doing it. They were, you know, what I experienced on the force support unit. They were a team of people that bonded together, knew what they were doing. Their work ethic was amazing. You know, dealing with some really horrendous sort of operations as they were. I become we used to do the serious and the deaths,
Fatal
the fatal road collisions. So you can imagine what that must be like, you know. And they're quite quite regular. You know, they're
Yeah.
they're not like a shooting where they will come once in a blue moon from our point of view, but they were regular.
And you
and
did
officers,
non-call as
Yes.
a road collision scene manager.
Yes.
And how, I mean, look, we've all seen dead bodies, and I do find it fascinating. But if I attended a murder, the person was already dead.
Mm-hmm.
You get called to a serious collision, traffic get called to a serious collision, that person could, and hopefully is still alive and savable. But there are
Yes.
occasions when you get there and they pass away at the side of
Yeah.
the road, which is horrendous. What impact did that have on you as a person, seeing all this, attending serious road collisions, fatal? How did that affect you as a family man?
I'm not going to be blasé about it, but I didn't feel it overly impacted on me. I'd been to, so there's a lot. As an inspector, you're expected to go out to any suicides, any
Yes.
suspicious deaths. So I'd already been going out to those for sort of many years. Some of the road collisions, obviously, there's a different dynamic to them. It's not just the seriousness of them, but actually the dynamics of the crash.
Yeah.
The impact that can have. So, from an inspector's point of view, you were there on the ground. You were managing the resources that you had. You were putting things in place to make sure that it was investigated properly. I never then had to go and deliver that message
No.
to the families. That's probably the hardest part of that, is actually doing the knock on the door or the phone call. You would, you never wanted to do if you could do it face to face, but you wanted to make sure you did that before it got out on social media. That it got out on any grapevine that was out there, and they tended to be really quite good at getting those sort of things out. So you wanted to get there as quickly as possible. I never had to do that. I was the person that was delegating that to others. But as the inspector, you also had the responsibility of your officer's welfare.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the debriefs afterwards included what they call trauma risk incident management, so TRIM training, which I did, and that was as important, to make sure that those officers were debriefed well, that they were managing their own sort of emotional well-being, and that they were fit and well to do it again. Unfortunately, that's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that was us as well. From our perspective as well. And you're quite right. The amount of jobs you get called to as an inspector, suicide. If it then got ramped up, then I'd end up going out. And I can vividly remember every single post-mortem that I've been to, but it doesn't have an impact on me. I don't lay awake at night thinking about it. That doesn't mean I'm cold-hearted. It just means that the professional element of what I did at that time, I just got on with, because we wanted, and I know you're the same, but we wanted to serve the victim, the deceased, as best as we possibly could to make sure that justice was served if justice needed to be served. I mean, road collisions are a completely different kettle of fish, because sometimes there's a lot of single vehicle collisions. There's not always a third party involvement. But it is, I mean, mortuaries are depressing places, but it's fascinating.
Fascinating. I was just going to say the same thing.
The pathologist, I mean, a doctor can ask you how you feel. A pathologist finds out what went on, and they are absolutely incredible people. And as you say, whatever the rub is between the CID and the traffic and FSU and the traffic, their knowledge of legislation, dates, weights and plates, they are just second to none, because they have to know what they're doing at the side of the road.
It's very dynamic. And quite proud to, there will be some of my friends, my colleagues, looking back, would laugh at that, but actually it was a really proud place, and to leave there, to retire from there, I think was certainly I thought, the pinnacle of my career.
Oh, that's fantastic.
You know,
mate.
from the point of view that I'd done a bit of everything at that point.
Yeah.
And I'd left the police service on a high. I loved every minute of my
Yes.
job. I never had any regrets, any qualms. I would do it pretty much as I did. I was very lucky. But to leave there in that respect, I was extremely lucky.
But what advice would you give a 20-year-old Kevin Gay joining today? The police is different to what we joined.
It is massively.
But what advice would you give to a 20-year-old Kevin Gay?
I think from that point of view is, you know, there's an element of enjoyment. You have to enjoy your work. It's tough. It's probably tougher now than it ever was.
Yeah.
So if you can't enjoy it, it becomes a burden. Try and get involved in as much as you can. You know, it's some of the point of it's who you know, not what you know.
Oh, massively.
There's some incredibly talented people out there. There's some, you know, that are very happy to impart their knowledge and experience to you. So seek those people out. You know, talk to people, find out what's going on, get your face seen in all the places. It's around dedication. You know, you have to dedicate yourself to that sort of job.
Yeah, you do.
You can't do it it's a vocation.
Yeah.
You're married to it.
I think if I was doing it again, the only advice I'd give myself is get my exams earlier. Because I found some of our colleagues inspirational, in as much as if they could do it, then you and I should have been an ACC or a superintendent, because they weren't. I don't care, actually. I don't care anymore. But they weren't better police officers than us. They were just more adept at knowing how to work the system to use their network in order to get promoted. And that's not a jealousy thing. That's a realism. You know, if I'd have done certain things, I'd have gone a certain way, and I may have got, but I didn't. I was a dyed-in-the-wool detective in the same way as you were with the firearms. And we enjoyed those specialist roles, though.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't change the jobs that I'd done. I would just change the fact that I'd get promoted or try and get promoted sooner. Right, so we've now retired.
Yes.
Kevin's out of the police service. You've got a lovely family.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a son, Callum.
Yes.
And a daughter, Caitlin.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, and your lovely wife, and you're now set, aren't you? Your life's set.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, your life isn't completely set, because Callum's got autism.
Yes, he was diagnosed when he was 5. So whilst I was obviously in the police, and there's an element of that, obviously, from my family's point of view. You know, that's my wife had to deal with a lot of that. I was at work.
Yeah.
You know, the breadwinner, if you know, for coin of a phrase. So she had to deal with a lot of those things. So there was an element of retirement on a decent pension. You know, give something back to the family, give time back to the family, because you know you are sort of ripped away at odd times, birthdays, Christmases, special occasions.
Yeah.
You know, so it was a time to do that.
You're now Kevin Gay. You're no longer Inspector Gay, and your family are probably more dependent on you now than they were when you were in the police service, albeit they're that much older. But you've now got the time to deal and be with them. And I can feel your pain. You know, you become an errant father and husband at times, because you're not there to support those family needs and be there for the special occasions. But Callum, diagnosed at the age of 5 with autism. What impact did that have on you as a family?
I suppose at the time it was clearly it was difficult. Callum struggled at nursery, so his claim to fame was he got excluded from nursery. So at a very young age, we was asked to come and pick him up, and we found him locked in one of the classrooms on his own, because they turned around and said we can't deal with him, albeit they'd sort of convinced us that they could deal with special educational needs and all those, you know, all those things that come with it. Clearly they couldn't. So emotionally it's very hard. As a family, certainly with an autistic individual, you know, it's all about them. That is what it's about. They're very sort of centred on them. So the family unit tended to split apart, and not in a horrible way. So we'd go on to day trips and things. One of us would go with Callum because he had a certain things he wanted to do, and then one of us would go with Caitlin.
Right.
So from that point of view, we spent many days out in different places, and one of us would sit with the ice cream van because Callum was fascinated with ice cream vans. So we'd sit with him, and he would sit there for hours, just sitting there and watching. And then obviously, but Caitlin had her needs. What we would call a neurotypical. She didn't have any issues, any challenges in that department. So she had needs. She wanted to do things with her mum and dad, but that wasn't always possible. So it's a balancing act. Yeah, massive balancing act.
And I know, we've been mates for a long time, so I know that your life is dedicated to your family. Absolutely, 100%. And the stresses and strains, and you have to plan for every eventuality. We were talking to Emma, who works with us in the office, and her daughter's autistic. And Emma won't mind me saying she's struggling at the moment because, and you've seen her pain today, because her daughter's 6.
Yes.
So she's going through the stuff that you were going through. And how old is Callum now?
Callum he's 20, 21, 22 next month.
Is he really? Wow, how time flies. You did a couple of jobs whilst you were having retired. You did some gardening, you drove some Teslas, etc. But you're now... What do you do now, Kev? What's your main stock in trade? What's your role?
So in 2019, an opportunity came up as the manager of a charity that's over in the west of Essex called Pact for Autism. It's a charity that my wife, with a group of other mums, set up as a support group in when Callum was 5. So we're talking
17 years.
Yeah, 2005, I think.
Wow.
They become a support group, and then 2012 became a charity and sort of grew, developed. They had 4 members of staff, my wife being one of them. She still works now. But in 2019, the manager or the CEO of the charity decided to step down. So that place became vacant. My wife turned around and said, well, you're a manager, you've been a supervisor. Why don't you do it? And I said, no, I don't want to. It was managing my wife for a start. And I'd been involved with the charity for many years as a trustee. I'd been on the board, I'd been chair of the board. So, I had a lot of understanding from that point of view, but nowhere near what I thought I would need, to manage the charity, as it were. But I think we was on holiday in Spain at the time, having a couple of drinks. I just found out that the job I was doing at the time was coming to an end, quicker than I expected.
Quicker than I expected.
Yes, because you was involved in that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly that ended very quickly. We was, sitting having a glass of wine, and my wife then turned around again and said, well, perhaps it's the time to, decide whether you're going to do this or not. And probably one of the best things I've ever done, decided that I would take on that role. What do you bring to the table? I mean, this podcast is about policing, the transition. We do the same with the military. But what skills do you bring to the table? I can tell you, but it'd be interesting to see what your interpretation is. I mean, we always turn around and said, what do you do as a police officer when you come out, when you come into retirement? And there are so many sort of transportable skills that you've learnt over the years that you can take in. So management and supervision was massive around that. Welfare, having the welfare of your staff in mind is really key. But I often have meetings with the staff now, our support leads that are in contact with families and individuals that are struggling. There's some safeguarding in relation to that as well. So some of the things that I bring from the policing arena around safeguarding, around even around investigations, gathering evidence,
Yeah.
all of those things are really key. When you're going for an educational healthcare plan, you have to gather evidence to make sure that that's effective. When you're applying or going for a diagnosis, even there's evidence that you have to supply. There's certain benefits you're entitled to. And these are the things that we support people with. So there's many things I think I brought from the police. The safeguarding areas, being able to work under pressure. Those pressures of really quite substantial challenges.
This is like
for
a promotion
families.
board, isn't it?
It is a little bit, and I just wonder how I'd do again. So yeah, it was all those sort of things, but essentially, I brought some lived experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the decision making, the ability to deal with issues as they arrive without getting into a complete flap. I think that's where let's take you back to a fatal road collision. You turn up there, you have to think really clearly under pressure, because if you go off on a tangent, then all of a sudden the investigation's lost, your credibility as a manager is lost, because there isn't a constable or a sergeant or an inspector, if you're a chief inspector, that wants to see you tip up there and just get in a complete flap. And I think we all know people that do that. But I think that those decision makings and the customer focus as well, which is a massive part of what you and I do, I think. But it's fascinating to hear what your take is. So how far do you cover? What's your area?
So we're based in the West of Essex. Our office is in Harlow.
Okay.
So we run quite a few activities, sort of soft play activities, where we give certainly our younger children and their siblings a chance to have some soft play. It's privately sourced. We've got gamers cage. We've got an art empowerment for older females that are identifying as neurodivergent. So lots of activities, but because we're quite a small charity, they're all very local.
Okay.
But we also run support lines, and we run lots of things on social media, like information sharing, signposting. We do workshops. We co-produce workshops with other professionals, and we deliver those across the board. So when we turn around to people and say, look, register with Pact for Autism, if you've got an interest in autism, it may well be that, a family member, it may be you're working with someone who's autistic, you're in education, you're in health. It doesn't matter what it is. If you need that additional information and knowledge, register with us. You could be anywhere in the county, and there are things that we can help with. Local support groups we struggle with because they're local.
Yeah.
So our families around West of Essex can we can go to them locally, but COVID taught us this. I took over the charity 2019. We all know what happened in 2020 in March. So 6 months later, I'm then in a position where I'm running a charity that predominantly lived face-to-face support, doing activities face-to-face, and all of a sudden we were offline. So we just had to think really carefully and learn new skills and to take that out virtually, which we did. We did support groups virtually. We did workshops and all the things. Nothing really stopped.
And it's interesting because we were talking earlier on before we came online. It's one of the few charities that supports children through to adulthood.
Yes. And so there's a few local authorities, our local authority run an all-age autism group. So groups of professionals that look into, all autistic support, ADHD, any neurodivergent, they look at the support around that. So us as a charity, it was probably 4 years ago, we had adults coming to us saying, what about us? Late diagnosed adults, they're self-identifying, not being diagnosed, and they were quite happy with that. But they were turning around and going, you support children, you support families, what about us? And we'd transitioned with Callum and a lot of our staff. We've all got lived experience. We've all got, or we all had children, autistic children, ADHD, lots of sensory needs. There was learning disabilities in there as well. So lots of sort of lived experience from that point of view. Those children, our children, transitioned into colleges. They then transitioned into adult services where, Callum is now. And we had a whole host of new things to learn, understand, and actually get support with ourselves. So we've sort of transitioned now into that, and just the understanding that there's a whole new world out there, away from education, away from children's mental health services, children's social care. It's very different, in the adult world. And then late diagnosed autistic adults were coming to us and saying, we didn't know we was autistic when we was young. We struggled, we were bullied. We've got massive mental health challenges. And a lot of the challenges around mental health is the mental health interventions tend not to work very well with the autistic brain. So there needs to be the adaptation around that as well. Yeah. So there's work to be done around that. There's work around employment, there's work around social care, health inequalities, benefit needs, a whole host of things that we've had to learn and sort of skill ourselves up about.
If I was to direct this podcast to any particular area, where would you like this to go? What section of society, or is it just a broad brush?
Wow, I think it's a broad brush. Certainly the children, parents, families, carers, of young children. It's the education. It's where they struggle in school. It's what support needs they have there. So it's very educationally based. To a degree, some social care based as well. But then when you get into young people and into adulthood, again, it's more the social care and the benefit system, but massively around workplaces. We're getting lots of reports around how, autistics struggle in the workplace, around reasonable adjustments, around those managers and supervisors understanding a different way of thinking and how they can adapt their work environment and their team to accept and acknowledge that there's someone that thinks differently, and that's pretty much all it is. Yeah. And companies that have done that, workplaces that have done that, have seen the massive positives that can bring.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of them might only be very small changes, but it's just understanding that they need to be done.
But that's all you need sometimes. And the other thing is, because when we were kids, autism wasn't something that was diagnosed or recognised. They were just kids that were out of control. And I interviewed Kirsty Last, whose podcast is the most recent one, and she is a lip speaker. And so communication is everything, because when you, in our former lives, if we went and arrested somebody who's got autism, the way they respond to you walking through the door as you're carrying a gun, you want them to respond in a particular way, but their brains aren't wired in that particular way sometimes. Absolutely. And they don't understand why you're crashing through their door.
Yes.
So do you think, that's a closed question, how do you think the authorities should deal with autism? When I say the authorities, I mean the law enforcement.
Yes.
How do you think that they should be dealing with autism?
It's another level around criminal justice across the board. There's data coming out that there are, within the criminal justice system, or in our prisons, in our mental health, secure mental health facilities, there are many, many undiagnosed autistics. and neurodivergent. They may have ADHD. There might be dyspraxia or dyslexia. There's Tourette's. There's many things out there, but they're undiagnosed. They're being dealt with and being secured under mental health, and none of that, autism, ADHD, none of those are mental health conditions. So it's really difficult. Yes, the police need to understand that people might not react in the way that you expect them to. Now, when I was in the police, we did training around that. It wasn't autism training. It was just a case of, you might find that person, if they do not react in the way that you expect them to, deal with it. You might have to change how you speak to them. You may have to change the communication completely. And that could be an array of things. English might not be their first language, so they won't react in the same way. They might be deaf. They might be blind. They might be so anxious that they just can't respond to you in the way that you expect them to. So it is a case of just adapting your
absolutely.
thought process. And we did training many years ago. There's still a lot to be done.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've put Kirsty in touch with another police service because they've picked up on the podcast that went out.
Okay.
And who gives the instruction in the police? I mean, would you go in and, certainly with our old force, would you go in and speak to people about how to deal with people with autism and neurodiversity? We
as a charity are very small.
Yeah.
Very small. We are 5 members of staff, all work part-time.
Right.
And a lot of that is because of the dynamics of our families. We parent carers as well. So there's an element that it's around capacity. I know Autism Anglia have done some work with Essex Police in the past. The National Autistic Society, I think, they're there.
Good.
Because they're national.
Yeah.
Them then coming into Essex Police. But I think there's enough organisations there, ours included, that could engage into an educational programme. And then it's just to raise awareness. You don't need to know the ins and outs of every autistic profile. It's just a case of, if they're not reacting the way you expect them to, change something. America are very good at this. They're continually doing this training where they might not, that person might not react the way you expect them to. There's high pain thresholds, so they may not tell you that they've been hurt in some way. They will answer very logically, so to a direct question of, did you do this? They may turn around and say yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But their perception of what you was asking is very different to what you were intending.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just, it's those sort of things. It's some of the things that we talked about really early on about how you learn to communicate with the public is to a degree being lost, because that connection to the public is being lost. We're doing more online, we're doing more over the phone and things like that. So we are losing the ability to talk to the public. And I think that's, again, when you say about skills that we bring in, we can talk, as we're doing here, forever.
Yeah, we can talk forever.
And if we've got personal interest and passion around those, please don't stop us, because we're going to carry on. But I think that to a degree that's being lost.
Yeah, I agree. But that we could debate the closing of police stations at 5 o'clock in the evening, Monday to Friday, blah blah blah. There are a lot of questions that are unanswered, and I do feel for the modern police service, but some of it is their own making.
Yes.
Kev, before I conclude this interview, is there anything you'd like to add, alter?
No, certainly not alter. I think add. I think, as we found with Emma this morning, that if you've got a family member, if you've got someone that you're connected to in some way, it might be a friend, and there's some suspicion of autism or of neurodivergence, which is all of those things around ADHD, Tourette's, and it could be an element of all of those things mixed in as well. there is help out there. There are people that you can talk to. Sometimes that's all you need is someone to offload on. So reach out to them, do some research, even over social media. There's some amazing groups out there. Pact for Autism is just one of them. So reach out to them. There's so much they can do for you. There's lots of families out there with lived experience that can help, but you've got to be willing to talk, to reach out, to listen, and to engage.
Absolutely. Kev, love to Lisa. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant as ever to talk to you, and I wish you well. I will put all your links at the bottom of this podcast so that everything is there.
Mm-hmm.
We know that funding is a massive issue. We'll get this circulated into the right areas and see if we can get you the support that you need and deserve.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Paul.
mate.
Loved it.
Thanks, mate.